Hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on our reward hour for May. I can see people filtering in at the moment, so welcome in everybody. So today, as you would have seen when you were signing up, we are going to be tackling the topic of handling relocation. And I'm really excited to have our guests today. So we have Amanda Moore, Senior Director of Reward Performance and Analytics at Beyond One, and Liam Brax-Bannigan, Director, Head of People Operations and Compensation at European Energy. So I will pass over to you both to do a quick round of introductions, and then we'll dive in.
Great. Shall I go first, Liam?
Yes, sounds good.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Danica. And hi, everybody. Welcome to the session. I'm really excited to be here today and to chat through some really interesting topics. So yeah, I'm Amanda Moore. As Danica said, I'm leading the reward performance analytics function at Beyond One. We are a global telco scale-up. We are well known for our brands across MEA and LATAM, so Friendly Mobile, Friendly Pay, and Virgin, MEA and LATAM. And we're at that kind of really exciting stage where we're growing, we've got lots to do, we're in that kind of scale-up mode. And before my time at Beyond One, I spent 6 years at Gymshark building the reward and function frameworks, and part of that was global billability, where we expanded internationally across many different markets. And I think what's really interesting is at the time I was building all those frameworks, building those policies. I'd never actually moved myself. And it wasn't until 2024 that I relocated from the UK to Dubai with my family. So I think what we'll bring to this discussion today is not just the frameworks and the theory, but also some real lived experiences of actually experiencing a relocation myself.
Excellent. Thanks, Amanda. So I'm Liam Brax-Bannigan. I am the head of people operations and compensation here at European Energy. European Energy is we're an energy firm, so we build wind farms and solar parks. Amongst other things, we have about 900 to 1,000 people, depending on the month, working with us across 22 countries. We've been around for a little bit, but we haven't necessarily had, I would say sort of compensation and maybe relocation attached is probably a little bit of has been a little bit of an untended garden a little. So there's a few different things that we're looking at to kind of mature different parts of the organization. I come with a background also in global mobility. I worked for quite a long time with KPMG, working in expat taxes and global mobility consulting, and then have been also in different organizations around the world for the last few years.
Amazing. Thank you both again for joining us. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Danica. I'm our community manager here at Ravio. And Ravio is basically on a mission to make compensation as less painful for everyone that kind of thinks about compensation day to day. So if you have been tuning in for a little while and maybe missed last month's reward session, this might look a bit different to what you're normally used to. So I'm sure you're kind of used to seeing Fazo, our CPO, hosting our reward hours, but we're changing things up a little bit. So we're basically handing over the mic to our reward room community. And like Amanda and Liam just said, practitioners that have really been through the topic in kind of handling all those angles. So today, as I said, we're going to be going over and talking about handling relocation. So relocation is kind of one of those areas that touch reward, I think, a bit more than people expect. It's rarely just a HR admin task, right? It pulls in comp philosophy and tax and benefits and legal. And I think there's a lot of quite difficult conversations actually when it comes to kind of this topic as a whole. So we've got Amanda and Liam here today to kind of take us through what they kind of experienced in their role today and kind of past roles as well, from kind of different contexts as well. And the goal today is to kind of really have a real conversation, right? Kind of the messy reality of it, the kind of the edge cases, the moments that maybe didn't go to plan, and maybe what people would have done differently. So to start, what I'm going to do is put a audience poll on the screen. I'm going to add that in. Can everyone see that? I think people might be able to start voting now. So it would be really great to understand kind of where you are at when it comes to relocation. So do you have a framework in place at the moment? Are you building one from scratch? You might handle it from a case-by-case basis. Maybe no relocation cases at the moment, but just want to be prepared if one pops up, and just here to learn. So yeah, it would be great to hear. Amazing. So we can see kind of the big winners there are, you handle it case by case, and then you have a framework in place, which is good to hear from the kind of things that we're going to be talking about today. Amazing. Fantastic. So again, we would also love to hear in the chat whether you're dealing with, a specific type of challenge, or whether it's like a particular geography or an employee that's moved without telling anyone, a framework, whatever it might be. The chat's there today to kind of speak to each other and speak to our guests as we go along as well. So I'm just gonna. Oh, sorry, take that off. Perfect. So I am going to drop off the screen in a second and hand kind of the discussion off to the experts. But as we go along, like I said, feel free to drop any questions in the chat that you have, and Liam and Amanda can pick them up as we're going along. In the chat, if anyone hasn't joined us on this platform before, we also have a Q&A section. So we'll be popping questions over onto that section as well. But there's also a chance to be able to vote on certain questions that other people have asked, so we can see what kind of questions are really popular to the audience today. So feel free to use that functionality as well. So with, I think, relocation, as we've kind of seen on that poll as well, there's no really universal right or wrong answer, right, when it comes to how to handle this. But I think there's kind of real consequences when it comes to every position a company takes, whether it's following a person or following the role, whatever that might be. So yeah, I'm going to hand over to Amanda and Liam now to kind of kick us off, and I'll be back at the end to wrap us up. So Amanda and Liam, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So yeah, I think we've started to get some questions in the chat already, which is great, but let's just kind of go back to that poll question first. So people are building and have policies already in place and frameworks in place, but actually the leading answer to that question was we're managing it on a case-by-case basis. And I think, I've seen that in lots of organisations previously, and I think, when your volumes of relocation are fairly small, that can be quite manageable. But in my experience, the danger really comes very quickly when your case by case becomes a norm, and before you know it, you've got two people that have moved with exactly the same situation but have been treated differently, and then their experiences are different. They've had, and then maybe they shouldn't have been treated differently. So I think that's what we're going to talk through today around philosophy, how we should position ourselves, and some of the experiences both Liam and I have had. Mm-hmm. So Liam, if we move into the philosophy question first, then, so does the relocation follow the person or follow the role, which is kind of the big starting question that I think a lot of people do have. If I just talk a little bit about my experience that I had at Gymshark with a little story, and then kind of hand over to Liam as well to talk about his experiences. So, when I was at Gymshark, we were initially just in one location in Birmingham in the UK, and very quickly we were expanding to other markets around the world, and also relocating people from around the world to come work for us in the UK. And as we were opening those new markets, the question that was asked really quickly was, when we move somebody from Birmingham to the US, do we pay them what the US market says? Do we pay them what they're already paid in Birmingham, maybe with a little bit of a cost of living difference? Or actually, do we just anchor it to a kind of global pay scale? And I think all three answers felt logical, had lots of pros and cons, would have solved problems and also caused headaches at the same time. But where we actually landed on, which I think was the most defensible one, was that we have to start with the role and not the person. And the reason for that was because if the compensation follows the person, before you know it, you've got an equity problem in that market with people doing two people doing the same job. And that's kind of lots of challenges that we all know cause lots of problems. So yeah, Liam, let's talk. Can you talk through like your experience and kind of how you've handled it in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this kind of philosophy question almost starts a little bit earlier, even than the idea of does it follow the person or the role. You sort of want to work out a little bit before that, why are you actually making this this move in the first place? So is this something where it's a move that is like the employee themselves want to move? Maybe they've got some family circumstances and they want to move to a different location, and you're accommodating that because that's part of what your kind of talent strategy is. Or is it something that's more, we have this really big new strategic location that we need to kick off, and we have this one person who we trust to get that going over there. I think that the why of why you're making this move is a really big driver in how it should be treated. And there's probably that difference between, maybe moving a bunch of people around for different projects. So that's business driven, but maybe not the big strategic thing that we was talking about before. And then there's the really big strategic executive, need that person there in that country, and maybe they're moving from, say, you can talk about maybe moving from a high cost location to a low cost, whatever. But that why is I think a really big driver of what you do with your relocation move there. So I'm just giving a really terrible consultant answer of it depends, but this is also sort of how it tends to play out, and I think you always have those. This is the philosophy that we have for most people, but then there's these occasional exceptions that we need to kind of flex things for. Yeah, how did you find? Because I think you also moved some people into some greenfield locations as well, Amanda. How did you find that work for you?
Yeah, I think your why point is so important because, especially with the relocations that you have to make happen. Sometimes you have to do more than maybe your framework says, and we can kind of talk about how frameworks sometimes have to bend later on in the conversation today. But yeah, we always kind of also looked at it from a scenario of like what is happening to the individual and their wider family as well. So is home still continuing in the home location, and what impact does that have? And therefore, is it a short-term move or maybe a medium-term move? And how do we then deal with that? So, do we move the person and then just give them kind of daily allowances for cost of living, given their expenses and everything that remains in their home country is still happening? Or are they actually going permanently? Their whole life, their whole family's going, and it's going for a long period of time, and then they're wrapping up their home location. Because I think how you handle that situation is also then very different, and that's where I think like following the role becomes more prevalent, because they are permanently moving to that location, working with that team permanently, doing that job in that market permanently. So I think that's kind of how we also try to, again, back to the why, like what's happening, what's the context, what's the scenario. And I think this is why a lot of people do it on case by case, because there is lots of different factors that come into play when making these decisions. But I still think you can build your framework and your philosophy around the different scenarios so that you've still got consistency when you then got the same scenario, and you're not treating people who are going through the same scenario differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And I think when you are building out your philosophy, you can always sort of have your decision tree of if it's happening for this reason or this reason, then we're going to keep it as maybe a home-based assignment. So they keep their home-based salaries, and maybe there's a cost of living differential and all of that sort of fun stuff. Whereas, if X, Y, or Z happens, then we're going to move into, it's much more of a host-based, maybe it's a local plus sort of assignment, depending on, who's driving the move and what's happening there. So I like that idea that you put forward there.
Should we talk through this? What if someone relocates from a high-paid country to a low-paid country question? Because I think that kind of alludes to like the difficult conversation that then comes from these policies and frameworks. And I can go first, and I'm sure you can add lots of other context as well. But for me, when we all work in some form of reward or people team, and difficult conversations have to happen in all parts of our roles, on all philosophies we've made, whether that's comp, benefits, well-being, performance, global mobility. And I think this is one example where the conversation can feel more difficult, because it feels like people are losing out, and you're telling somebody that their salary is decreasing is a really challenging conversation. But how I've kind of handled it in the past is around trying to really bring it to life for the individual. So explaining to them what their current lifestyle looks like at their current salary in their current location, and explaining to them, although that the salary overall is decreasing, explain to them the type of lifestyle that they can still have. Because when salaries decrease, it's normally because they're moving to a country with a lot lower level of cost of living, and therefore what they should be able to get for their money should still be very similar to what they can get in a higher cost of living location. And obviously I had that from my own experience when I moved from the UK to Dubai. My cost of living significantly changed, but everything also changed in parallel as well. So I think it's bringing that the kind of like real life expenses to people, to explain to them what their life could look like in that market for the salary that they then would have, even if it is lower.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, that conversation of working out what sort of lifestyle you could have in that other location. You also kind of need to make sure that it's got that local context to it. Yeah. So you can't just move across the world from one end of the world to the other and expect to have the exact same brand of, I don't know, peanut butter or whatever, because that is obviously going to cost a lot more than what it did in the other location. And so you're not just picking up your entire grocery basket from the UK or Australia, where I'm from, or wherever, and shifting it over there, because that's clearly going to increase your cost of living. It's in that local context. What is your purchasing power available to you? So it's there's some interesting conversations to have with people, but you're right, showing that the sort of life that you could have, the types of accommodation that you had, all of that changes with a local context, but comparatively it should remain reasonably similar, you would think.
Yeah, for sure. So if we move on from the philosophy question now, then, so I think we've talked about the why that's important, the context, why people move in, the context of the move, how long it's for, etc. Can really kind of build into your philosophy. And even if you do it case by case, you can still start to build some frameworks which people can follow if they then have similar situations. But let's talk about kind of the actual the framework in more depth now then. So Liam, kind of, can you talk us through like how you operationalize it? What actually happens when you're managing a relocation across 22 different countries?
Yeah, sure. So for me, when you're sort of building your frameworks, I really sort of see these as a way of almost preloading your leadership decisions. So if you're working things out on a case-by-case basis, then often what you're doing is you're sort of taking the case as it comes in, trying to get all the different permissions for costs and whatever as you're going along. And then the next time it comes in, you're doing all that again. So one of the things that's kind of sometimes difficult to nail down is having the leadership team spend time on some of these relocation frameworks that you put together. But the way that we try and, or I try and sort of frame it to them, is that this framework is a way of preloading those leadership decisions. So if everything is within that framework, then we don't have to go to them every time there's a new case that comes up. We've already made those decisions. So they can spend less time on the minutiae, provided we, do all the right reporting and all that sort of stuff into them. But so once you've got that, you've got that time with the right people to approve your frameworks. You need to make sure that it obviously connects through to your talent strategy, and through to your business strategy. You should be, really clear, as we were talking about why the mobility program's in place. And then it just needs to cover, at the very least, your policy basics. So who's approving what, in what circumstances, all that sort of stuff. So this is that preloading of your decisions. And then the other stuff is, just sort of making sure who's going to be just kind of working through it practically and working out who's going to be paying for what, in what circumstances. Is it, a business-led or an employee-led situation? Those home and host-based compensation considerations. And then, the other thing that you kind of need to remember with global mobility, that you generally don't with other policies, is that moving is always really personal. And you have to remember the family. So, is there a family that's going to stay at home? Are you going to give them ways to visit those family if you're only moving them for a short time, or are they going with? And so how are you going to help them through that to make sure that it's a good success? So that's sort of what I see as some of those basics that you need to have in as you're building those frameworks.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely isn't just about compensation, is it? It's so much more than that. And yeah, when I went through my own move, compensation was probably the least of my worries, to be honest. When you look at other things that you've got to set up, like find a house, find school for the children, tax challenges. Yeah, there's lots to think about, which I completely underestimated, to be honest, when I have been building these programs in the past. Mm-hmm. And actually, it wasn't until I went through it myself. I was like, wow, this is so stressful for me, for my partner, my children. And actually, I think that wider level of support, other than just the change in compensation, is also really important.
I mean, even the immigration side is, we talk about taxes being, very stressful, and a whole bunch of these other pieces around the compensation side. But the immigration side is probably the really key one. If you get that wrong, then that's way more stressful. People are, at risk of getting deported, or, you can't make it into the country, or you're sitting there waiting for another visa, and, the time's ticking down for when you might become illegal in that country. So it's very, it can be really stressful. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And you talked about earlier, the scenarios of people moving, and sometimes, it is business critical. They've got to move. Maybe it's a high performer that you've got to get into a different market. Maybe there's not really a want from them, but there's a big need from the business. And, they're not going to go with the framework or the policy or the philosophy that you've set up, and you need to do some flexing. Maybe they've been promised something, and you, at this moment in time, don't know about that yet. So I thought it'd be good just to kind of talk through, how we handle those situations. And I think somebody put in the chat earlier about the internal equity and the problems that it can cause with the new team. So I think, the one challenge is that person moving where they don't really want to go, but it's really business critical that they don't go. And I think it's really important in these situations to have an honest conversation with the person to find out what their reservations are, what is it that's really important to them, and then coming up with maybe an exceptional, package to get approved, which is then a good outcome for the business, but also helps that employee make that transition as well. And when we were at Gymshark, we used to do something really, really simple, but actually was really powerful, which was around a relocation guide. So like it was a practical human document, and we can talk about it later, that says, you know, this is what it means to go and work and live in this market. These are some of the things you need to think about. This is where you could, this is like neighborhoods that you would live in. This is where there's, you know, some schools that you might think about going to. This is how you would navigate the doctor system and the hospitals. And because they're all decisions that you have to make as a family, and you don't know even how to go about them or navigate them. And, you know, Google only takes you so far with answering those questions as well. So, you know, I think it's about understanding, when you've got those really niche situations, about understanding what it is that makes the person, is going to make this person want to go, and how can you then build a package really that's going to make that happen.
Sure.
So we've talked about already, like what relocation needs to cover, and how we could kind of build that package together beyond just the pay changes. What do you think most companies forget to put into the relocation package, from your experiences?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, like I was saying before, the immigration piece is one that that's probably the most important, but often gets a little bit overlooked. I think a lot of people put in that they will cover, you know, some of that relocation stuff. Some of the immigration, you know, applying for an immigration visa or whatever. And often when the business leaders are, you know, sort of talking to the candidate for a move, they're sort of really focused on making sure that the candidate themselves is set up and all ready to go. But sometimes the immigration piece doesn't work with the family. So, you know, maybe we're sort of in an age of maybe people living at home longer than they might otherwise do. And so maybe there's adult children who are living at home and they're wanting to come along, but they can't on a dependent visa because they're too old. So what do you do with some of those little pieces? So making sure that the immigration and the family there is really important. But I think some of the things that just get forgotten are things that people don't really realize are issues until you get into it. So often you've got these two ideas about the sorts of assignment that you've got. You can have people who are going for a really long time. So I don't know, 2-3 years, something like that, maybe a little bit longer. And then you've got those assignments that are really short. So maybe a 3-month to 6-month sort of thing. Those people tend to understand how everything's going to work there. But when you've got those ones, especially in the middle, somewhere between 6 months and 2 years, they're often really tricky to set up from, especially from a tax perspective, because they often haven't left a country long enough to break tax residency, and they haven't, and it's too long for them to get away with not paying taxes in the new location. So at some level, they're sort of paying tax twice sometimes. Like they might have to be withholding in the former country and the new country. So what do you do there? How do you sort it out? Eventually, the tax treaties will work themselves out, and you're only paying one set of taxes, but you might have to pay tax in the home country and the host country to begin with. And so you're only getting 10% of your package unless the company steps in. So making sure that you can understand how to deal with some of those medium-sized assignments, that can be a little bit of a tricky one. How do you deal with some of those assignments that you've seen where, I don't know, maybe it started out as something that's pretty short and then has extended a little bit, maybe into that medium zone? How have you dealt with those?
Yeah, so they've gone on their own, left their family behind, and then before you know it, they are staying there long term because kind of has changed and family need to join. I think you just have to very quickly transition to that other option of, okay, how are we now going to get the family here? What does that look like? I think there's lots of questions in the chat about like the benefits that would come with a package. So maybe it's annual flights home, maybe it's a schooling fee, maybe it's the standard things like immigration. Tax advice isn't always standard, but I personally think it's really, really powerful. And should be pretty standard. Also, like somebody asked about cultural training, I think again is another really good one, which is often overlooked but can be really powerful and could be happening anyway in your organization if you're in a global business. But if you're moving somebody, just because they speak the same language in the new location, it doesn't always mean the culture is the same. So I think that cultural training can really set people up for success. Yeah, we mentioned flight, we mentioned schooling. Sometimes housing allowance can come into it as well. So there's lots of reports out there that kind of show you what you want to do and what organizations do. But I think ultimately it comes down to budgets, how much you need these people to go, and the type of organization you are in relation to supporting them, because it can very quickly become very expensive.
Yeah.
Some organizations will kind of do a flexible budget and say, like, this is the value that you've got and you can spend it on what you need, whether that's shipping, whether that's extra baggage, or you've got some real fixed things. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's about what works for you and your business around and I think that's where it comes back to the philosophy point around deciding what's your philosophy, what are you going to support, what are you not going to support.
Yeah. I think that there's also that, probably, I don't know, 20 years ago, there was this great lifestyle that you could have as a career expat, where you'd go from country to country and you'd have, schooling paid for in really great schools, and you'd have, these flights home, a couple of times a year that were paid for, and there'd be a whole bunch of these different benefits that were being provided. And, that's still the case maybe in some really mature global mobility programs. But I would say that a lot of those programs have sort of been scaled back from what that lifestyle was like. And so you tend to see a lot more of those programs which are, one sort of local based, again for that equity piece, and maybe you do a few things in the first year or two of the assignment, depending on how long they're there, to kind of help them settle in. So you might start off with a certain amount of schooling assistance or housing assistance, and then that scales down as people get more comfortable in the new location. So it's as you say, it's got to go back to the philosophy of why you're actually doing it, and do you is this more of a development piece for the employee, or is this more of a we need this one person right here, we need them to be as comfortable as possible, and we need them to not be distracted by any of the other stuff that happens with moving, so we'll take it all. This is really white glove service. But
yeah, and I think like one of the benefits that can also be underestimated is having a buddy. So having a buddy in the new location to help people navigate all of the questions that come with the move. How do I book a taxi? Where's the best place to go and get my groceries? Maybe somebody that's just also been through a relocation, so understands, or if you don't have that, just somebody that's kind of a good onboarding buddy to help them move into the market. Because there's lots of questions people have during the whole experience of moving, beginning, middle and end, and having somebody that they can chat through those two, I think, is another real good benefit, which comes at pretty much no cost, but provides a real invaluable level of support to people, whether they're moving short term in 90-day period, 1 month period, 12 months contract, or whether it's a permanent move as well.
I would also say that if you can spare a buddy to help them go and look at housing, then that's a really good one, because often there's all these, like, every country has their own little nuances when it comes to renting a new place, is there utilities included? Is there, do you have to take your garbage separated into 5 different piles to this bin like 7 miles down the road or something? Like there's all these different things that you need to understand about housing, which having somebody local is really, really helpful.
Yeah, and I had a buddy in my move, and I don't think I'd have survived without them, to be honest, because they gave me all of those questions, like you said, that you have to answer and have to decide on.
Yeah.
I think there's a question in the chat around, like, is there a typical time frame to use to differentiate short-term moves like secondments, assignments with like maybe more support, and then like a full relocation with like a one-way move? From my experience, like short-term moves like secondments tend to be like 1 to 3 months. And then you tend to kind of have more assignments like 3 to 12 months, maybe sometimes 18. And then anything beyond 18, I think normally they go more permanently, and the world can change very quickly in 18 months. And then you kind of decide what's going to happen after that period of time. So, I think that's kind of the time frame I've tended to work with. How about you, Liam?
Yeah, agree. For me, I usually sort of base longer term assignments sort of around 2 years plus. But, as you say, it kind of depends a little bit on what the level of support is that you're willing to offer at different points. And it might also depend a little bit on your country combinations that you're working with. For some of them, 18 months is fine, and you can basically pack everything up in one country and start everything afresh in another. For others, though, you might need something a little bit longer in order to really say that you're no longer in that first country anymore. So if you've got certain country combinations, that's usually a good guide. Once you might get a little bit of tax advice or something about how those sorts of things work, and then that might be a good way of going, all right, this is a long-term assignment for us, this is medium term, this is short term.
Yeah. And how about when people just slowly drift into a new location, which I think is probably become more prominent since COVID, where, remote work has become more normal. People have tended to kind of go and work from a different location for maybe their organisation has like a 30-day policy, or maybe somebody relocated previously and then for family reasons needs to head back for a short period of time. And before you know it, that short period gets a little bit longer and a little bit longer. Should we just talk through that topic?
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of real kind of disaster cases that you can talk about with these sorts of things where, somebody's decided to, be in a certain place for 30 days or so, maybe within your policy, and then all of a sudden they've met somebody there and they want to stay a little bit longer, and the business says, yeah, sure, that's fine. And then eventually it gets around to us and we go, well, now we need to work out what's happening from a tax and social security and pension perspective. In the meantime, this person's already ended their lease in their home location, and it's all a big disaster. These drifts do really happen. And I think, you're right. I even, there are even sort of government institutions that are sort of saying, you can work from anywhere for a certain period of time. So these things are becoming really, really prevalent. I think the important thing is really trying to catch them early, and try to work through it. Make sure that everybody understands what the consequences could be if we don't actually get it right. Because if you don't get it right, you're not only creating a lot of risk for the company, but you're also creating a lot of personal risk for the employee. And this, and although we might be trying to do the employee a favor by saying, yep, go do your thing and enjoy your life in Costa Rica or whatever, there is a lot of personal risk that they are then taking on by kind of this drifting method, unless they're doing all the compliance work themselves. So, sometimes you do have to have those hard conversations with managers and say, it's really lovely that you care about your employee enough to be willing to say yes and to accommodate this. But the reasons why we're saying no is because we're actually not doing them a favor in the long run. So understanding what those risks are, I think is quite an important piece to that.
Yeah, and I think it's also about having that regular check-in, isn't it? Like not just avoiding the conversation, like having a regular check-in to say, like, we're okay with this situation for now, but we need to keep having this conversation to make sure it doesn't become a long-term problem. So that when the organisation decides, okay, we can't do this anymore, either for a compliance reason or because that remote work is just no longer working from a performance perspective, it's not a surprise. And you have had that regular check-in and you're being honest about it, although it's okay for now, we need to keep talking about it. And just supporting people, if then it's no longer the right thing to do, it's about supporting people through, okay, well, you want to remain in that country, okay, well, how can we support you through the exit process? What does that look like? So that people, still feel well looked after and cared for by the organisation.
Yeah. Do you have any specific triggers that you use for kind of formalizing it, or is it just using those regular check-ins to sort of work out when your risk tolerance has been breached?
Yeah, I think in previous roles we've always started with the 30-day criteria, and anything up to 30 days, especially if it's your home country, is normally okay. But then have that check-in conversation every month. And even if that conversation says nothing's changed on either parties and everything's fine, then at least we've had the conversation, it's recorded, there's a document of the conversation being had. It's just a light touch check-in, and just keep having that. Usually then organisations say at 90 days, like, we need to think of a more longer term plan about this. But that also depends on where they are, the jurisdictions, tax complications, compliance complications, etc. And I think, again, where you really wanted to keep that person in that location that they're in, but maybe it's not working from a compliance perspective, you've got the EOR option of, moving a colleague to an EOR. It's not always the right answer, it doesn't always solve all the problems, but it is one solution that can be considered. And I think it's about the organisation then kind of costing that out, looking at the pros and cons, and is that again more of a solution for long term if we want to keep this colleague, let them stay where they are and make sure we're compliant.
Yeah, and I think also just the you've got to remember the compensation element of it as well, and ensuring that what they're doing is fair on the people in the countries that they're moving to as well. So you might already have an office location there that's really nice, but if they've come from maybe a higher cost location with higher salaries, etc., then you kind of need to have that conversation of, well, you're doing the same work as a person sitting next to you, but you're being paid very differently at the moment. So we need to have that conversation about what's fair from a governance perspective too.
Yeah, for sure. And there's one question in the chat which is around like stock options, equity, RSUs, and how organisations are managing those with international colleagues. And I think this is probably one of the examples where tax advice it becomes worth its weight that you have to pay for, because you get really good advice, you'll get some options of what you can do commercially, that therefore you're not the employee's not losing out, the organisation's not spending too much money. So I think like in those situations, like where it's quite extreme around like RSUs or stock options, it's about getting tax advice to know what are your options, how can you then manage it, do we have to move to a cash alternative, they all kind of advise and talk through. And I think that's where like the tax element becomes a really important part of the package for the employee, but also for the business as well.
Yeah, and that's also a really important one to know. A lot of the circumstances around the equity compensation. Sometimes you can get these things that have been granted a couple of years ago, and they're still vesting, but the employee doesn't really think about it when they move because they've already been granted. So, who cares? Usually companies are very interested when the vesting is continuing. They want a little bit of the tax of whatever that gain is. And, depending on the country, you might have gone from a place where you are only taxed when you exercise the options or when the RSUs turn into shares. But you're moving into a place where they tax you as soon as they're granted. So, as soon as you step foot on the ground, you effectively have a taxing event. So, equity is a really, it's a super interesting topic, but it's also one of those ones that really gets a lot of people tripped up. It can have really long-term consequences as well. So if you've got a person who's been in a country for a few months and they've been taxable there, and then they've had equity that's sort of vested over, a number of years, eventually you might still need to pay tax from like 4 years ago when you were, in this other country for a little bit. So
yeah, and I think that's a good example of where sometimes pushback can come back at a later moment in time. So the colleagues moved, they're really happy with the relocation package they've had, they've settled into their new home, everybody's happy and sorted. And then 6 months later, something happens and they realise they've got a big tax bill. And they were like, well, I didn't know this was going to happen. Nobody told me. And then you get some level of pushback around like, well, you should support me in this. And the business may disagree with that conversation. And think that's another example of like a hard conversation where, by doing some of the pre-work up front, and understanding everybody's situation in its entirety, you can then maybe predict some of these problems, and then you're not like blindsided and colleagues aren't really frustrated, you're not ending up with maybe a retention challenge or an additional cost that you've got to consider as part of the move as well. So I think that's where like an example of where pushback can come, and it's about being prepared for it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that whole idea of the framework kind of preloading a lot of these decisions. It's not just the decisions from the leadership team. It's also a lot of transparency for the employee about who's actually going to pay for what in what circumstances. So, usually your frameworks start off reasonably light, but then as you have these edge cases come in, that sort of gets added to your framework, and that sort of gets added to your policy, etc. So, don't be afraid to create your frameworks with what you know at the moment, and try to be as transparent as you can for your employees. But then, make sure that when these things do come in, sort of work out, do I need to add this to? Is this a policy decision that we should keep recorded?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm just look in the chat to see if there's any.
Yeah, there's a couple in here. So I think one here is about what does your relocation support package typically include for internationally mobile employees? And so the question is then, are there standard benefits offered across the board, or do you tailor it case by case depending on role, seniority, destination, country? How have you treated that in terms of how granular you go for the different types of packages?
Yeah, so like you said earlier, like maybe some more senior people tend to get more of the kind of other benefits that we spoke about around the schooling, housing, etc. But what I found at Gymshark that worked really well was that kind of flexibility and saying to people, we will give you a lump sum of this value, and you can use it in a way that you see fit for purpose. And because everybody's situation is different and everybody stresses about different things, whether that's moving their pets, whether that's buying new furniture, what it is. So I usually find that the lump sum gives the most level of flexibility with a buddy, with some tax and immigration advice. And I think somebody asked in the chat earlier, like, do you use a partner? And I think, again, it depends on like the volume of the relocations that you have, and whether you think that's important to you, whether it comes at a cost, whether it adds any value, or whether actually you can kind of navigate the queries with the local team and with people that have already experienced it as well.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I would also say that it's not just the money cost that you should keep in mind here. It's also the administrative cost that you have of keeping this all up to date. So the more granular you go with how you set up your frameworks, the more you are going to need to put in terms of resources and time to administer it. So it can, if you kind of mature your program too fast, then you don't have anybody to actually administer it, and then you just spend all your time on relocation without getting around to all the other stuff that we know that you have to do.
Yeah. There's another question in the chat around like tech skills moving around the world and kind of the salaries to pay. And I think we talked about this at the beginning, but focusing on what the rate of the pay range for that role is in that market, I think really helps you have a solid foundation of like if somebody's going long term, what they should be paying for and what they should be paid to do and how that compares to their peers in the market as well.
Yeah. And I think that there's you sort of mentioned that there's this experience that those with tech skills argue that the local market data doesn't apply. I think that also sort of depends a little bit on what your overall comp philosophy is. If you, as an employer, believe that you just have this one base where you reference all of your pay from, then sure, that makes sense. But otherwise, I would be referencing back to what your philosophy is about how you pay, despite how much the tech people think of themselves on a global scale. I mean, ultimately, they're applying for a role in a particular market, and so that market is going to dictate the pay. If they are applying for a role in other markets, then that other market will dictate the pay. So they want to be in that market as a starting point, and if they don't want to be in that market, then they will probably need to get on a plane and go somewhere else and move their family and do all of that stuff themselves. So you may hear that I don't have a huge amount of sympathy for that way of thinking. I don't know if you've got a different opinion on that, Amanda.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, but yeah, I tend to find like what people say is happening isn't actually what is happening.
Yeah.
In the market. I think that's why, as reward professionals, we all use market data. We all use kind of valid and verified sources to get this information from, rather than just on the word of mouth of the people receiving the pay and benefits.
Yeah, exactly right.
Amazing. Hi everyone. Surprise. Nice to see you all. Amanda, Liam, thank you so much for that. I have one final question for you both as well. And it was basically if a reward leader or someone handling comp gets an ad hoc kind of relocation request in their inbox tomorrow, the first one that they've ever gotten, what's kind of the single most important thing that they should do before they respond to that?
Oh, go on, Liam.
You go ahead. I
was going to say, from my experience, like looking back in hindsight, I would speak to somebody that's relocated to try and get a flavour of like what did they have to go through, what did it really look like in practice. Because although we could work out for ourselves and we can create a philosophy and a framework, I think until you've actually experienced it or spoken to somebody that's experienced it, that what the offer and the framework is can be very different to the actual real life experience. So yeah, really start with like the person that's going through it, what they're experiencing, and how you, as an organisation, you can then do that to support it, and then build your policy from there. But yeah, like the technical stuff, like the salary methodology, the tax equalisation, the benefit framework, that's all really learnable. But I think it's about how you support people through that transition, because it is a massive move. And if you're moving with your family, you're not just dealing with the emotions of one person, you're dealing with the emotions of lots of people who maybe don't understand some of this stuff that you do around like tax equalisation, shadow payroll, etc. So it's about understanding it and then building it into a framework that's really simple for other colleagues to understand.
Yeah, agree. For me, I think it's going back to that why question. So why is this relocation happening? Is it something that's really business-led, and we are moving this very strategic person that we can only trust this one person to go over and do it? Or is it something that's maybe a little bit more employee-led? So they've got their family circumstances, or they have always wanted to tick off living in the Bahamas or wherever it is. These sorts of things are also really important for how we would respond to those sorts of requests, because then you can sort of work out, all right, well, if it's a really strategic situation, we handle things on a case-by-case basis, and we'll have to spare the resources somewhere to make sure that this really works. Whereas in the other case, then maybe you sort of look at all the other strategic priorities that you're trying to get done, and you go, well, look, we don't really have the capacity to make this move happen right now. So then you're sort of working out what is it that you can do to either make it move on sort of a lighter administrative basis, or can you delay the move, or can you, is saying no an option? All that sort of stuff.
Amazing. And we actually had one final question in the chat as well before we finish off. And Claire asked, does your organisation make use of employer of record arrangements? If yes, how do you manage benefit consistency to ensure that employees hired through a EOR receive a comparable overall rewards package to directly employed staff?
Yeah, we had this real big challenge at Gymshark. We don't have it now, but we did at Gymshark, and we used EOR. And I think when you use EOR, I think you need to go into it knowing it's not going to be comparable, and having that honest, transparent conversation with the colleague to say your experience won't be the same and your benefits package won't be the same, but this is what we're going to do instead. So because you can't, it's not an equalisation situation, the experience will be very different. They might miss out on some internal communication, they might not get their pay increase letter the same day and with the same content in. So I think it's about being really honest about that and say, like, this is a provision we're putting in place, this is what it will get us, but this is the challenges that it will also cause to work through, because it won't be the same. And it might be that they get an increase in comp, they might get something different, but yeah, it won't be the same.
Yeah, it's maybe a little bit easier because usually when you're using an EOR, you don't have other employees within the country. So there's, you're not going to have that horizontal comparison, but you are going to have the comparison to what they had before they jumped on the plane or the ship, or whatever.
Or to peers in their team that are in a different country that they speak to every single day, that are based in a different part of the organisation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining and giving us an hour of wisdom. Really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this for our audience as well. And thank you to everyone that tuned in all the way to the end. As hopefully some of you may know, but if you don't know, we do these sessions every single month with now our community members. And if you also want to come and join the community, if you are part of a reward team or do like comp or benefits as part of your role, please click the link below as well. We would love to have you. But yeah, thank you all for joining. Hope you have a lovely rest of your day and week, and we'll hope you see you next week, next month. Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye.